Hi, and welcome back to Let's Talk Adoption. I'm Heather. Kim's here with me today, and we're excited to talk about something a little bit different, but also something that comes up with a lot of the adoptive families we work with, and that is um, Christian parenting tips. And I just want to be clear, sometimes people think, well, parenting an adopted child shouldn't be different than parenting any child, which I suppose, on the overall grand scheme of things, that's true, but it is different because adoptive parents have to think of things that biological parents may not ever have to.
hmm Many of the families we talk to are thinking about how their faith will shape their parenting after the adoption. And some of the parenting principles that Christians talk about are things like grace, compassion, patience, and those become actually, there's more of a component to displaying these qualities like grace, compassion, and patience. More of an opportunity to demonstrate that when you are parenting through adoption.
Right, right. Because adoption, it doesn't completely change what parenting looks like, but it can highlight things in a different way. And again, there's just, I mean, take open adoption, how you fit that into your parenting style. Or, if you didn't adopt a newborn, maybe you adopted a child that already has a story before they joined your family. That's going to bring the opportunity to parent uniquely or even bring unique opportunities to how you parent that child.
So today we're sharing a few Christian parenting ideas that we see come up again and again in adoptive families.
Right. And the first one that we talked about was stewardship. And I think that's something that right now, I think it's talked a lot about in faith circles. And that's just the idea that parenting is it's a form of stewardship.
hmm I actually think about this a lot, Heather, especially, I mean, I don't know, maybe like you said, it's just coming up a lot. The concept of stewardship is coming up. It does seem to be coming up more and more in the landscape of Christianity. If
Hmm.
you are, plugged into Christian media and resources and attending church and communicating with other Christians, you're part of community. Stewardship has been coming up a lot more than usual. And I think about that a lot, Heather, as we are stewarding every person that comes across our path, too, just as adoption professionals. And I think that adoption is just a wonderful opportunity to steward well that child that God has entrusted to you. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that.
Hmm. Well, and really, it's not just God has entrusted to you. If you have an open adoption, the birth parents have entrusted that child to you. If you adopted, through the state or through an agency, that child was still entrusted to you. And so for adoptive families, that can feel like a very tangible concept. I've talked to families who have even shared things like they not are not always sure that they are doing everything they should be doing or could be doing with the weight of that entrustment that they have. But I think it really is one of those concepts, again, for Christians, I think it's a little more natural because I think it does come up and it's talked about a little more. But maybe for adoptive parents who are, don't really identify like that, they still may feel the weight of the stewardship.
And as you were talking, I was just kind of thinking about maybe some people who may be listening who aren't familiar with the concept of stewardship. And Heather, I'm sure you can explain this really well. But I would say one way I've heard it explained is let's picture England, right? And there's like a big castle, a manor, it's a mansion, it's a big property and estate with so many acres. Do they use acres in England? I don't think, is that a
Maybe
measurement?
hectares, maybe?
So,
I
yeah, right. Okay, so lots of land
uh-huh.
and a big building, lots of rooms. And the people who are taking care of this property while they may be the owner, often generationally, they consider themselves more of the steward of the property. They are there to steward it so that it is intact and in good condition to pass on to the next generation. They don't consider it theirs per se personally, but they are the steward of this. And as Christians, when we think of everything that we have actually belongs to God first, and He has just entrusted us with that, that is our stewardship.
Right.
If you have an income, a savings, a house, a car, as Christians, we don't believe those things are ours, even though, of course, in society, the law is that those are ours. We have
Mhm.
possession, right? But as families of faith, people of faith, we are simply stewarding the things that God had the grace to give us because we don't think of ourselves as entitled to anything.
Right.
We didn't come by anything of our doing. It's all by the grace of God.
So I did look up stewardship, the definition, and you're spot on. It
Uh,
is taking care of something. That really is what it is, whether it's property, whether it's children. And I want to take a step back here again from, you know, whether whether you have a strong Christian walk or you don't. Stewardship in open adoption is something to really be aware of because sometimes, Kim, when we talk to couples who are looking for a closed adoption, and I know recently we shared about one of those couples. Often the motivation for a closed adoption is because they feel they don't want to share a child, or there's some fear based there. But ultimately, the children aren't given to us to own, no matter if they're biological or adopted. They're not ours. It is our job to take care of them, to raise them, to do our best as parents. And really that is the role of stewardship, regardless of who you're parenting. But in adoption, again, it's just that extra level because you've been chosen by the parents. And so that's kind of a neat way to think about open adoption is, you've been entrusted with this child to steward, to guide, to take care of. And yes, legally it is your child, but it also is an opportunity to, you know, parent and love and share uh, through the blessing of open adoption. Which, if you haven't heard Kim and I talk about open adoption before, we are big open adoption fans, and definitely something that we talk about a lot.
And can I just add one little tidbit when it comes to stewarding, especially the birth mother? If we imagine that, and anyone you come into contact with, me talking to Heather right now, I am talking to a daughter of the king.
Mhm.
If I think about it like that, how dare I treat her as anything other than that? And
Right?
so I need to steward that well. And that goes for
Absolutely.
birth mom too. She is the daughter of a king, whether she knows it or not. You and I, as Christians, we know that. So we need to steward well that blessing
Hmm.
that we even have the opportunity to interact with someone,
Right.
especially a birth mom.
You bet. And that kind of takes us to how we do that. And I think one of the most important tips I would give any parent is, you know, leading your child, leading your family with grace. It applies to every family, absolutely. But in adoption, I think it's another one of those things that is extra meaningful. Again, because children are in today's best adoption practice, they are learning their story from the beginning. It's something they always know. And so adoptive parents today expect questions about their identity, about belonging, about how we came to be in the family, about adoption, about their birth parents. And those questions can come up often when you least expect them.
Right. You're standing in the kitchen doing the dishes, and suddenly your child runs up out of the backyard and just asks a question about the day they were adopted or his or her birth mom.
Right.
And it can take you off guard and by surprise. And sometimes when those conversations happen, we wonder if we handled the conversation in the best way. And we, of course, want to handle it with grace, but we also need to give ourselves grace. And
Definitely.
yeah, and I love, Heather, how you said that children nowadays are being told their adoption story from the beginning. That means if you adopt a newborn, you're sharing his or her adoption story from birth. And
Mhm.
that's going to give you, like Heather always says, lots of time to practice and
Right.
get the phrasing right and to have that grace with yourself to finally be able to convey it in the way that you want your child to receive
Right.
that. But, those moments can come unexpectedly, and don't worry that you have to handle everything perfectly. I think as parents, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves.
Definitely. And that's true regardless of how you parent, biological or through adoption. And so having that grace with yourself is great. And also, sometimes again, as a busy mom, it can be hard to have that grace and patience with your child. And so, like you said, Kim, you may be in the kitchen in the middle of something, and here he or she runs up and asks a question that's going to take a lot more than a three-word answer. You know, taking the time, whether it's right then or saying, "Hey, let's talk about that, a little later," to be present, to be willing to listen to your child, and honestly, to have the grace with yourself to be willing to learn. If you need to learn more about how to handle and approach some of the questions your child might have as they grow up.
Yeah, and I love just having this theme of grace, grace for
Hmm.
your child and grace for yourself as a parent. And if we're talking about adoption, grace for anyone involved in your relationship, a birth mom and maybe even her extended family too, having grace
Right,
for them.
right.
Yeah.
I think one of the tips you and I talked about is one that also is about your child's story, and it is really guided by the words we use. And I think as a parent, we all want to be intentional about the words we use and don't use around our children. And one of those things is how we speak and communicate about our child's story, both to them directly and also to others, because um, our children's story is their story. And by that I mean, say you adopted a newborn, say the birth mother, say she struggled with addiction. That's not your story to tell everyone, because it will affect, I promise you, it will affect how Aunt Ruth views your child from the very beginning. And as your child grows up and he's a little spirited, Aunt Ruth will sit there and say, "Well, that's because his birth mom was a druggie." I mean, people will hang on to those things. So remembering to speak positively about your child's story, meaning that not every detail is for everyone's consumption, and then also speaking kindly to your child about their birth parents. Even if you may struggle with, maybe your open adoption isn't going real well, maybe you don't know anything about them, you know, we can still be intentional about the words we use.
This is so important, Heather. Often through the years, we've talked about the importance of positive adoption language.
Right.
That is something very important to me as a words person.
Hmm.
When you spend any amount of time carefully crafting a sentence, the words you choose and the words you opt out of start to really mean a lot. There's significance to that. And so I want to let you know that there is such thing as positive adoption language and to encourage you to become familiar with that because the words that you use when you're talking about your child's adoption story with them or to others, it can shape how the child feels about themselves. And I'll just give one quick example because we're not doing a podcast episode on positive adoption language right now. But one example is let's say that your birth mom gave you up for adoption. How is that going to resonate with a child through the years that they remember being told, my real mom gave me up for adoption, versus your birth mother, your tummy mommy, chose adoption for you and created an adoption plan for you. She placed you into our family. Positive versus negative.
Hmm.
And this really does impact how children feel as an adoptee and how they view the birth mom and how they view the birth mom ties directly into how they view themselves.
Hmm. Right. And that's, I love how you say how they view the birth mom is how they view themselves, because that ties into how children understand and develop their own story. And also it kind of brings to life that, one of the kind of more complicated areas of adoptive parenting, we're not trying to pretend that everything about adoption or parenting is simple or easy, but you know, there is the opportunity to always speak with respect and with confidence and with child appropriate honesty. Some things children are not going to be able to understand perhaps until further down the road, but it is ensuring that everything you say about your child's birth family, about their story, is from a perspective that will help them build that positive self-identity. And trust me, I know this can be hard if you adopted a child that was a little older, that remembers maybe a tough time. Maybe they were removed from their parents' care. Maybe there is not a story like Kim shared where they, chose adoption or placed you for adoption. Maybe they came from a background of neglect or abuse. You know, there is speaking positively doesn't make all of that go away. And there may be times that, some of the questions your child has is about that time. But, at the end of the day, focusing on what you can from a positive perspective and enlisting help if you need help doing that or dealing with some of the things that come up from that. Again, it is going to help your child have a more positive self-image, because at the end of the day, they're going to know that biologically where they came from isn't you. And so ensuring that they do uh, are able to hear positive things about the genealogy that they have biologically is really important.
Hmm. And that word genealogy just like hit because in the Bible it talks a lot about genealogy.
Mm.
It uses paragraphs to explain lineage and
Mhm.
to document that. And so that just goes to show how important lineage, genealogy is to people, just us as humans, knowing our history, what people did we come from. It's a normal thing to want to know about. And I like what you said, Heather, in pointing out not every family is going to have a rosy, beautiful Hallmark story that,
Right.
your tummy mommy chose us
Hmm.
and we got to fly to the hospital, go to the hospital and
Hmm.
she said, "Here's your baby," and we got to meet you for the first time and
Hmm.
she just looked at us with so much love. Not
Hmm.
everyone has that story, right?
No.
And so I think it's good to acknowledge that some parents listening might have more of a challenging story to navigate, but I think one tool to keep is grace.
Hmm.
Grace in how you
Definitely.
speak of the birth mom, and you don't have to share every detail.
Hmm. And I think it's good to ensure your child knows that they can always talk openly about their story and that it isn't something that is forbidden or that makes you uncomfortable. Even though they may ask questions that make you uncomfortable. But one of the other things I think that can really help parents um, who are in these seasons or are hoping to get to these parenting seasons is being aware of the children's books that are out
Mm.
there. There are children's books for everything, for children adopted through foster care, adopted internationally, adopted as newborns. There are books out there for children who one parent was a egg donation. And I mean, there are so many different children's books out there, but having a little library at home that reflects different stories can really help children understand their story because those will also speak positively about the birth parents in those books as well.
And we have some episodes planned to come that I think will be really interesting for our listeners. One of those is going to be about international adoption. And so I
Hmm.
want to just bring that up for a quick second that when you're sharing your child's story with international adoption, often these are babies or children that were found.
Right,
And it's easy to jump to a conclusion and an assumption that the child was unwanted and was abandoned. But we're going to talk about that a little bit in an upcoming episode about international adoption. And I think one factor to keep in mind is that in other countries, they don't have agencies like this and a
hmm
24/7 hotline that you can call and you can make a plan, and adoptive parents are in waiting and are so blessed to receive your child, and or a social services system that is called then to come and remove a child from a harmful environment. Every country doesn't have that. So their system is then to bring the infant or child to a highly populated public area where the child will then be found. And I want to leave the rest of that concept to the person we're
right.
going to be talking to at international
Yeah,
adoption. But just so you know, there is always a way. I know that I've talked with someone for many years about international adoption, and I pointed out your birth mother intentionally left you in a place where you would be found, and maybe she just didn't have any other options.
right. And that kind of takes us to our next tip, Kim, which is compassion. You know, teaching compassion through your family's story, whether it is through your own adoption story or, like you just said, a birth mother that left a child in an area where it would be found. Yes, that can be seen as abandonment, but it can also be seen as great love.
Mhm.
It is, unfortunately, we hear too often about newborns abandoned in a dumpster or something like that here in this country. But, you know, the story you just alluded to, those that takes courage and love. And so I think one of the neat things that adoption can do within a family is help children develop empathy, especially, like I mentioned a minute ago, when they grow up understanding that families can be formed in many different ways, that birth parents are loving and are choosing this for them. I think all of those things naturally lead to compassion in children.
And as an adoptive parent, it's normal to talk openly about birth parents and difficult circumstances and the choices that led to adoption. And part of empathy is understanding that not everyone comes from the same point of view or set of circumstances, that sometimes someone has grown up with instability and hurt, and all they've known is a life of pain.
Mhm.
So, how can we have empathy for them? We need to teach that to our children. It needs to be taught, it needs to be demonstrated. So, being able to And that's what I was saying in the beginning of this episode is adoption gives you these learning opportunities built into your parenting to demonstrate that empathy. And I think
Right.
that is just such an important skill to have. It's a learned skill.
It it really is. And children do learn that from parents. They learn to be empathetic or they learn to judge based on what we say and what we do also. You know, are we showing kindness or are we showing judgment? You know, those not just conversations, but what we do is going to be an excellent teacher to our children.
Yeah, so take advantage of those opportunities and don't miss out on these, important opportunities to have, you know, to teach this powerful lesson to your child.
Right. So, one of the things that we often talk about, regardless of the topic, it seems, is flexibility. And I think probably uh, staying flexible and trusting a path that may be unexpected. Now, many adoptive parents already understand this deeply because, you know, truth be told, adoption may not have been their first choice on becoming parents. So they often have a, an advantage in trusting an unexpected path because Kim, you and I both know that, you know, parenting things pop up that you weren't expecting, regardless of how you became a parent. But learning to trust that unexpected path and being flexible in it really is a great skill to have and a great skill to teach your kids.
And yeah, you're right. Very few people grow up assuming that adoption will be part of their adoption story. Many people say, well, we've always been open to adoption. We always thought that one day that would be an amazing thing to do.
Hmm.
We've always had a heart for helping a child who needs a family, you
Hmm.
know, but we thought we'd have biological children first. Naturally, we thought that. And I think this is another opportunity to use positive adoption language when you
Hmm.
talk about your story and your experience and how, God led you to a point in your path where it pivoted unexpectedly, right,
Hmm.
to adoption. That we don't say something like, well, we always thought we'd have our own children. Well, the child that you have, whether biologically or through adoption, is your own. So let's try not to use negative adoption
Hmm.
language, especially in that moment, because that really matters. I've talked with an adoptee who was just always introduced as, well, these are our children, and then here's the one we adopted.
Right.
You don't want that to be the thing.
No, no. And you're right, Kim. For some families, they have been through fertility treatments, or maybe they had a diagnosis that they already knew adoption was their path. For others, yes, they may have felt called to explore adoption, but I think regardless of how you got here, um, there were there are always unexpected twists on the way.
And even having a biological child can have unexpected twists and turns.
Indeed.
Pregnancy, the amazing birthing plan someone makes, the way the way they thought recovery would go,
Hmm.
the way they thought whether through adoption or biologically, the way they thought having a newborn,
Hmm.
in the middle of the night, you're just so patient and loving and not tired at all. And your hair is freshly washed every day.
Yep.
Parenting, it's just part of it. Unexpected things are always going to happen. And I think that families in adoption especially say, adoption really changed them in ways that they didn't expect. And I think it
Right.
gives you a little more resilience when those unexpected moments happen in parenting.
Definitely. And one thing that you just made me think of that I think when I've talked to Christian moms especially, they have struggled with is sometimes after the adoption, they find themselves feeling like um, still, they don't still have the same longing for a child, but they find themselves kind of unexpectedly blue or depressed or
Hmm.
down. And what I have heard is I I thought I would feel and then fill in the blank. I thought I thought I would feel, all those feelings of the past would go away. We got here, we did it, we adopted, and still there's something that just isn't quite what was expected. And there is something called post-adoption depression syndrome, which is very real. And I think probably you mentioned the sleepless nights and the lack of shower. Those things take a toll also. But I think it's just good to know and to remember that that can be a normal part, especially if, you know, maybe we didn't take the time to do some of the healing journey that we needed to before the adoption. It is, I mean, postpartum depression is a thing. It's normal for after women biologically have a child, but it is also normal after a mother adopts a child because there was so much work, so much buildup. It took so much to get through an adoption, and it is normal. It is okay to have feelings that maybe are surprising. And again, talking about these unexpected twists, that is one that we do often see in adoption, and it doesn't mean that anything here is wrong. It just may mean that you need a little extra support, whether that's sleep or time to shower, or you need some meals brought in, or maybe, talking to a counselor or your pastor might help bring things a little in focus, or talk to someone at your adoption agency because, like I say, I've talked to lots of moms about this. And when you start to hear, the reality of the situation, you can kind of see and understand, oh, okay, that's what this is. That's what I'm feeling, so that you can, make a plan to move positive and not focus on those feelings that, like I say, they're just another unexpected part of adoption, especially when you are a new parent.
Hmm. And even when you adopt a newborn, you can have trouble finding the right formula. Your
Yep.
child can have sleepless nights for no logical reason. And that can take a toll. And
Hmm.
that's part of why there are post-placement visits with your social worker. Once you've come home with your baby, you'll schedule time for these post-placement visits. Adoption professionals nowadays are very aware of post-adoption depression syndrome, very aware of this, and are on the lookout too. So be honest so that your social worker, when you do the post placement visits, can support you and get you in touch with the right resources. I think just a general resource is being part of a new moms group. Be with other
Yeah.
moms who are going through the same thing. I know when I had my daughter when she was little, we had MOPS,
Hmm.
Mothers of Preschoolers.
Hmm.
Great name, MOPS. So glamorous. But that was once a week. We would meet at a church. Certain people would bring snacks, and there was childcare. So the moms could just, for 45 minutes or an hour, just be able to do a craft, be able to have a conversation, be able to kind of be ourselves for a second. And so kind of tap into that. And I think one of the themes just in what you shared, Heather, is don't isolate yourself.
Right.
And I think it's so good that you brought up post-adoption depression syndrome because
Hmm.
disorders and post-adoption depression syndrome, trying to get all the letters right. Um, I think that's so good that you brought that up because now someone who's feeling these feelings and they don't understand why, but they're feeling ashamed because God answered their prayer, and
Hmm.
the last thing they're feeling is grateful. you know. Now they
Yeah.
don't feel alone. They know that so many other people are feeling this, that there's actually a name for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I hope what you got from our conversation today is Christian parenting is not about having perfect answers, not at all. It's more about showing up with love, with patience, with grace, and really a willingness to grow alongside your child, which I
Mhm.
think that's probably one of the things we don't talk about enough culturally is how, you know, none of us really knew how to parent when we started. That knowledge grows as our child grows.
hmm And adoption can give you such a unique opportunity to live out these values every day.
Mhm. Absolutely. So if you enjoyed this conversation, please, we'd love you to share this episode with someone you think might find it helpful, maybe someone who is um, struggling with parenting or who is a hopeful adoptive parent. Please feel free to share it. Um, Also, if you would like to send any questions or show ideas, please visit us online at letstalkadoption.com.
If you've experienced any of the things we've talked about, such as post-adoption depression syndrome, we'd love to hear your feedback and experience and understand, and we'd love to hear how this maybe resonated with you today and helped you feel a little less alone. So be sure to write to us at letstalkadoption.com. And as always, thank you for joining us on this episode of Let's Talk Adoption.